Okay, so welcome back. So in this second half, we're going to focus really mainly on kind of land acquisition strategy, our nature reserves and the role they play and how important they are for the delivery of our overall goals. So first of all, a quick reminder of our strategy, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. But at its heart, it's really, really simple. We know that nature needs more people on her side. So lots more people campaigning, joining in, making change and supporting the Trust and other environmental organisations. And nature just needs a lot more space. I mean, we know that if we give nature space, it will bounce back and it will thrive. So it's a really important part of our strategy is just to get as much land as possible into some form of nature-friendly management, whether directly or in partnership. So it's a really simple strategy in many ways. And within that, we've just got these three goals, which I won't go into now in depth, but one of them is that first goal, which is to try and achieve this 30 by 30, which is 30% of land and sea in nature management. And by the way, the other 70% needs to be managed sustainably and in a regenerative fashion. So that's whether that be housing or farming or whatever it is. All businesses and all industries need to give back more than they take from nature. So the rest of the 70% should be sustainable, and that 30% goal is really for those amazing nature reserves, rewilding sites, and that proper space for nature to thrive. So that is the one I'm going to mainly focus on today. And just very quickly, we know that in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, from the baseline in 2019, where we measured the amount of land that was in nature management and in protection, we know that we need probably roughly around 60,000 new hectares of land from that baseline to 2030. Now, it's not quite as much today because there's been some progress, but it's still a huge amount of land that we need to convert. And we're making a bit of progress. And at the bottom there, you can see our contribution to that 30 by 30 target. And by the way, half of our existing sites are not in good condition either. So a big part of that is to get existing sites into good condition. So our target is to make sure 100% of our own land is in good condition. And then our other target is to buy 1,000 hectares of land between 2020 and 2030 and work with partners to bring forward another 5,000 hectares into nature-friendly management. So those are our targets, that's our contribution to the overall bigger picture. So how are we doing? So on the acquisition target, by the end of the financial year, we had acquired 302 hectares, which is great. So we're kind of pretty much on track, and there's lots more in the pipeline, and I'll give you some spoilers in a minute about our plans for next year. So it's brilliant, so far so good. 75% of that's been on the Isle of Wight. So well done, Jamie, and thank you, Malcolm, for all of your encouragement. And, you know, those of you who've been members for a while might remember that the Isle of Wight used to be a bit of a poor relation. We weren't doing very much on the island in the past. We've really focused a lot of energy on the Isle of Wight in the last 4 years, and we've basically quadrupled our impact over on the island, which is absolutely amazing. So that's really great news. I showed you that map last year, and you can see the two new ones, Kittenox and Swan Pond Extension that David mentioned earlier, our large rewilding sites, which is Numwell and Little Duxmoor, and just that gradual, bit by bit, we are building this incredible nature network through the Eastern Yar Valley and beyond to try and really join up these bigger, better, more joined up sites for wildlife, which is really what it's all about. So it's really exciting, and I'll return to Wild and Wight at the end. But we don't forget the smaller sites, and the smallest sites can be incredibly rich, and this is one that's on mine and John's bucket list, to expand the wonderful little reserve that is Coulter's Dean on the Chalk in South Downs area. And I'm really delighted to give you a little bit of a sneak preview into a future announcement that we'll be making. We are about to acquire some more land to increase the size of Coulter's Dean by 5 times, which is amazing, which is absolutely brilliant. And it does show, because it's so rich, these orchids are spreading out, the wildlife will spread out, and that's a really important part of our strategy, is to add to, expand and connect those pockets of rich wildlife so that it can spread out into the wider countryside. And there's been, just mentioning legacies again, this will be funded by an incredibly generous legacy that we've actually been sitting on for a while because we couldn't spend it because it was quite specific to this part of the world. But we're so delighted we're now able to fulfil the wishes of those donors, and topped up by an incredibly generous donation from one of our corporate members as well. So we will be announcing that one pretty soon, and we hope we'll get that by the end of the year. Another one is expanding the fabulous Deacon Hill, which is near Winchester, and that was another bucket list one that's been on my list for a number of years. We're able to now acquire some land next door, so there's some arable land you can see right at the top there. So we're able to acquire that arable land, which will be restored to deliver biodiversity net gain. And then there's some existing chalk downland underneath, and that's about 9 hectares. And apparently that's actually even better for Duke and Burgundy than some of the other bits, so really excited about that as well. But as David said earlier, sort of mentioned the climate change risks, you know, we are really now seeing some quite serious risks and issues, particularly things like with drought, with climate change. There's predictions that fires will be increasing probably by about 40 to 50% over the next few years. We know that our rivers are, you know, polluted. And that's a picture of a chalk stream with algae in it, which is not how they should be. We've got the picture on the left, which is the algae on the mudflats in Portsmouth Harbour, which again, really quite a serious issue. And then the really scary map on the right is what climate change and sea level rise will do by 2100 if we don't act. So that is pretty scary stuff to see. And of course, what this does mean is that we've got some really, really big decisions to make as a society about coastal change. And we've been talking to the local authorities for many, many, many years about trying to invest upfront in, you know, more marshes, more kind of wetland habitats around the coast to try and protect us from storm surges and sea level rise. Unfortunately, they're being rather slower than we would like, and we now are seeing some really serious threats to a lot of our coastal sites, including, sadly, Farlington Marshes, which on the top right you can see those water levels are so high that reed bed has basically been killed. We hope it will recover, and we hope that seawall will be repaired soon, but it's a sign of things to come, which is why we must be really pushing the authorities to invest upfront in mitigation sites so that we can create additional habitat for wildlife to migrate to when the inevitable, sadly, happens. And so our kind of bigger strategy really is really thinking ahead about climate resilience. How do we build that climate resilience in the face of all of these changes? And really it comes down to bigger, better, more joined again, strategic investment in sites along the coast and sites where we can bring in natural processes like rewilding or extensive grazing, making the use of ecosystem engineers like beavers in appropriate locations so that they can start to create more wetlands. And so all of this is really in our minds when we're trying to be strategic about where we invest and what we ask local authorities to plan for as part of their local plans and that sort of thing. And so we've got a couple of big visions that I'd just like to sort of present to you, fairly early thinking in some ways, but it's kind of a mix of early and not early because some of this has been on the cards for a number of years. But a big vision, a big priority for us is our Forest to Foreshore programme, where we're looking to build a continuous wildlife corridor from Roydon Woods all the way through the Lymington Valley down to the coast, again using a mix of legacy funds and corporate donations and an amazingly successful appeal, which I'll touch on shortly. That is now starting to become a reality. So this map concept here we've put together to try and sort of start to bring this concept to life and showing people how we can create this amazing corridor all the way from Roydon, all the way through. And then we're looking to bring forward really large areas of land on the coast to create additional wetland habitat. But quickly onto the appeal. So one of those bits of land right in the middle of that corridor was the extension to Lymington reed beds. And thank you if you donated to that appeal. We have done so fantastically well. We've managed to raise enough money to buy that piece of land without dipping into our funds. We are trying to spend the money, I promise you. We did set aside money from funds, but actually the appeal was so successful, which is great. So it means we can spend the reserved money on something else. But we raised over about 130,000 towards that appeal in just a few weeks, which is amazing. So thank you for those of you that supported that. And if you follow that all the way down to the bottom, right the way down to the coast, you'll see this is our New Forest Coastal project that's been in development for a number of years now. But the idea is to bring forward all of that arable land that you can see in those photographs. And over the next few years, that will be gradually restored back to coastal grasslands, marshes, wetlands, scrub, and just loads of fantastic habitat for birds. But also, even better, none of that pollution will stop all of that runoff, all of that pollution that's going into the Solent, because that will not be intensively farmed anymore. And so back to Wild and Wight very briefly. So as we've said, we've quadrupled our impact on the Isle of Wight in the last few years by delivering large-scale rewilding and conservation work, and not to forget, of course, the marine work and the Solent Seagrass project, trying to link land and sea and show the links between them. We're also working brilliantly with some regenerative farmers, and we've got a great partnership with Nunwell Home Farm, who are next door, who are really trying to break the mould of farming and really champion a different way of growing food, which doesn't use chemicals and doesn't use fertiliser, and actually works with natural systems to create products. And they work with us on our rewilding site, and that's great. So we need all farmers to transition in that direction, and they hopefully will eventually. But we're also building a real kind of sense of excitement around this whole idea of Wild and Wight. Because we know that wildlife can create jobs, it can create benefits, it helps our health. And so we're trying to really create a much more joined up story. So yes, it's about wildlife, but it's also about us. It's about the economy, our health and well-being, and jobs, and just prosperity. So there's a really interesting conversation now happening around the Isle of Wight biosphere, and how that can really be put forward as a beacon of hope for how to do development in a sustainable way, and how to create jobs from nature recovery, and how nature and natural capital is an equally important part, well, the most important part of the economy, and that underpins everything. So there's some very interesting conversations happening at the moment. And this big strategic thinking was the theme of our Seeing is Believing trip that I mentioned earlier. So back in May, we invited all of the wildlife trusts, all of the chairs, all of the chief executives, plus the national team, and a few funders and a few other partners. We took them, we hosted them here, and they all came to see what we were up to. And that was just such an amazing event, and I was so proud to show everybody what we were doing. And it was the rewilding, the farming, the wetland restoration, the marine habitats, and we really tried to show the connection between land and sea and how it's benefiting the local area and the communities as well. So we've got a short film about that in a minute. But before we see the film, I just wanted to zoom out very quickly and just paint a picture of this bigger strategic thinking. We know we need a lot more space for nature, and we've got to start to really zoom out and think about the connections between what we're doing and what other people are doing in our neighbouring counties. So we're talking to the fabulous Wheel to Waves project, which kind of all spilt out of NEP, where they've got 100 landowners all signed up to creating this amazing wildlife corridor all the way through Sussex. We're hoping to replicate that here on the Isle of Wight and in Hampshire, and just create this incredible nature corridor where people can put their hands up and say, yep, I want to be part of that. So that will be amazing. We've got our Forest to Foreshore and our Wild and Wight, and we're also talking to partners, other big exciting projects like the Big Chalk, which is on the back of this picture here. And I think ultimately this is what we need. We need really ambitious partnerships, more collaborations with landowners, with government, with local planning authorities to scale up nature recovery now fast. And just a quick plug for the local nature recovery strategy, that LNRS, that's what that means. That is a statutory document that is supposed to set out how we're going to reach 30 by 30. That was due out for consultation soon, maybe in the next week or so. I would urge everybody to have a look at that, because it should set out this kind of ambition, how we're going to pitch together to really create the change that we need. So thank you for listening. Happy to answer any questions later, but for now, let's hear a little bit about the trip that we did.
So here we are in East Cowes, about to get the ferry back to the mainland after a few really inspiring but quite tiring days on the Isle of Wight as part of Seeing is Believing 2024.
This Seeing is Believing conference has been absolutely brilliant, and I think for me, I can sum it up with two moments that will stay with me forever. The first is overlooking an area that's going to be renaturalised, where beavers are going to be reintroduced, and after we learnt about it, everybody got up at the top of the hill and started sharing ideas, asking questions, sharing expertise. There was such an energy to the conversation, and I stood away from it just looking at it in awe, and for me to observe that has just been a real privilege. The second memory is last night at dinner. There was an example of the best of what we can do when we collaborate together. So regenerative farmers being unapologetic about the challenge ahead and laying their cards on the table and calling us all to collaborate with them, to share our expertise with them, to really create change when it comes to food productions and nature's recovery. And there was such a buzz of excitement and enthusiasm and opportunity. I will hold that in my heart forever.
We've got these amazing nature reserves that are exploding with wildlife just after a few years of rewilding. The explosion of growth is really quite remarkable.
There is some amazing biodiversity here. We've seen marsh harrier, we've heard lapwing, Chetty's warbler, and so much more. It really is a special place.
So just in these few days, we've learned so much about that connection between the land, the rivers and the sea. And we've been really inspired by meeting amazing nature-friendly farmers at all kind of scales, and people working really hard to bring nature back here.
Events like this are instrumental in building relationships, getting to know one another, as well as just sharing ideas about how we can really work together to help. And if we are going to solve this incredibly complicated crisis, it has to be about collaboration.
We've seen some great examples. I'm really, really pleased that we could show all of you all the amazing work that we're doing here at Hampshire and Isle of Wight. And hopefully we've inspired all of the Wildlife Trust to really up our game and be more ambitious, because we need to do it because we're running out of time.
It was an absolute eye-opener, and I will share what I have learned over the past few days far and wide.
And can go back to our trusts thinking how we can do even more to bring nature back.
Thank you. So yeah, hopefully that gave you a little bit of a flavour, us showing off to the other trusts, which was really fun. So now I'm going to introduce one of my colleagues. We're going to focus on nature reserves because they're unbelievably important, and I'll hand over straight away to Fiona.
Hi everybody, I'm Fiona. I'm the reserve manager for Nor Hill Nature Reserve, and I manage 6 reserves in the South Downs. So I'm going to tell you all a bit about Nor Hill today. I can't tell you everything because that would take all day. It's a I hope you all know the site. It's a fantastic, iconic reserve. So it's 20 hectares triple SI. It's mainly chalk grassland, but there's 6 hectares of ancient woodland amongst that 20 hectares. It's owned by Rotherfield Estate, and they own a lot of the land in the area. And it's been managed by the Wildlife Trust since 1970. It's renowned for its orchids. Its 14 species have been recorded over the years. I think we've got 12 still. It's got some rare rose hybrids, which are incredibly difficult to ID. It's a nationally important population of juniper there, with about 130 mature bushes and quite a few young plants as well, so that makes it a really important population there. Again, a really amazing site for butterflies. 44 species have been recorded since 1975. Fairy shrimp, I wish I had a picture of fairy shrimp to show you today. I urge you to go and look up fairy shrimp because they are fascinating. They go back in the fossil record 140 million years. So it's quite a rare species, red data book species, that we've got there in a couple of the rutted puddles on top of the hill. Also, we've got dormice, harvest mice, a great badger population there. Red kites, I've yet to visit the sites and not see a red kite. Every time I go there, there's at least one. Really good site for yellowhammers, bullfinch, lots of birds. So that's Nor Hill in the middle of the picture. We also own a bit of land called Tawny Barn Field to the just to the north, which is about 3 hectares of what was arable land, and so we're managing that there as well. But one of the main challenges at Nor Hill is that it's quite an isolated site. You can see from that picture that it's amongst a sea of arable land. So we've got a lot of rare species there. Some of them have opportunities in the wider landscape, but some really are very restricted to Nor Hill. So that is a real issue there. I've written on the challenges here that scrub dominance is quite an issue at Nor Hill. It's really important habitat scrub, but it's overtaking some of the chalk grasslands, so we're spending a lot of time managing the scrub. Species richness is quite a challenge at Nor Hill because we've got such an amazing abundance of different species at Nor Hill. Trying to get the management right to suit every one of them and make sure we don't lose any one of them is quite tricky, but we do like a challenge. Climate change is obviously a big challenge. Some of these species will do better with the effects of climate change than others. Some of the orchids, for example, don't do well in drought conditions. Year following a drought, you'll get a real decline in numbers. And because it's a popular site and very sensitive, trampling is actually a bit of an issue because we get a lot of visitors in the spring and summer. And they do tend to wander all over the place, as you do, trying to find the rare things, but you can sort of trample some of the habitat on the way through. So that's a map of the chalk pits, and you can see down the side, I don't suppose you can read that, but a lot of the chalk pits are named. It's basically the history of Nor Hill, it's medieval chalk pits. So when you look on old maps, it's called High Common, and different families would have had rights to access different pits, so you get this really varied topography on site, and that's what makes it so special. One of the things that makes it so special, you've got this whole range of sheltered microclimates, and you can be there in a frost. You could be working there in ice. We were working in the winter at one of the really sheltered pits, and it was just so warm in there, but you get outside the pit and there's still ice on the ground. But yeah, it's really, really amazing site. I think it's been described to me as Teletubby land a number of times. So I thought I'd start with the autumn-winter period, seeing as we're in the autumn now. So it's a really busy cutting season for us. So we do have Wednesday work parties all year round, so if anyone's free on a Wednesday. But we do tend to have more in the winter as well, because I do take advantage of any other opportunities that come my way. So we work really well with the South Downs National Park Authority and their volunteers and any other independent volunteer groups. And you can see that's in one of the pits. They're using these tree popper tools to get the scrub out by the roots, which makes a really good long-term difference. We're trying to manage the scrub like this as much as we can. We've got a big area to cover, so it's not as quick as going through with power tools, but it does make a long-term difference because you're actually getting the roots out, which is very, very satisfying. And in that area, we actually got a lot of regrowth from an area that was purely dogwood. We had so many tway blades and pyramidal orchids this summer and cowslips coming up, which was great. This year there's a lot of extra activity going on Nor Hill because we've had really generous funding from a number of sources. So we've had a really generous fund from a private donor, and also we're successful in getting a grant from the Friends of the South Downs and a grant from the High Level Mezzanine Flooring Company in Petersfield. So these are some of the things that's funding this year. So we've managed to get GPS collars for our cattle, which is brilliant. That's going to make a huge difference. We funded some invertebrate surveys, which are going on this year and into next spring, which is brilliant because it had been years since there'd been a full invertebrate survey on the site. And initial results indicate that we've had over 500 species recorded this year, which is really excellent. And that's going to provide us with really important management advice because we do as much surveying as we can in-house, but we'll miss the more obscure things. So we're going to be doing some scrapes. So that picture shows an area that we've brush cut in advance of having several scrapes put in. So we're literally going to have a digger going in, and it's starting next week, hopefully, and taking scrub out by the roots and exposing the bare chalk. So part of the reason that Nor Hill is so good is because of all the active quarrying that's happened there over the years. And so this will really, really help us not only in our scrub management, but in encouraging some of the rarer wildflowers. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that work happening. We've put in a livestock corral at Tawny Barn Field this year, which makes our livestock movements much easier. And it's funded some coppicing work. I'm really hoping to go ahead with a project creating a big pond in Tawny Barn Field. It really lends itself to it. There's part of the field which is much wetter, and we've actually in the invertebrate surveys they found that they were finding some wetland species already, so it'd be really good to put a pond in there. And we're going to be doing some works for fairy shrimp, creating more ephemeral pools and deepening some ruts. And that's just a close-up there of a blackthorn twig with 3 brown hairstreak eggs. We spend an awful lot of time on volunteer tasks looking for brown hairstreak eggs because it's a really important site for brown hairstreak butterfly. And if we go in and we manage the scrub and just cut everything and burn it, you know, we'd lose these things. So we have to look out for them. Just in the areas we were working last year, we found 400 eggs that would have, if we hadn't been doing this, they would have ended up on a bonfire. So if we still manage the scrub, we leave some of the young blackthorn with eggs on. But if we want to take any out, we go and we hook it up into the blackthorn that's staying put. So once those caterpillars emerge, they will be able to find fresh growth to eat. And we've actually already found 100 eggs in the areas we've been working this year. We've started coppicing again on site because there hadn't been an awful lot of coppicing happening for years. So some of the hazel coppice hadn't been cut for 60 odd years or so, it looked like. So we are doing 2 little coppice coops per winter. It works out at about half a hectare being opened up every winter. So that's a picture of one of the coppice areas in the middle of last winter and a picture of what it looks like now. So that's lots of fresh regrowth in there. And I was really chuffed to have white helleborines come up in this area, which was really good because they hadn't been seen for a while. And with that material, we're creating dead hedges, and this will protect the coppice from from cattle browsing and deer browsing. It's not always successful. This particular one was, but the other one that we created on site, the cattle got into, unfortunately, and have had a feast in the last week. So yeah, British white cattle, we have 6 on site usually every autumn. So they graze back the vegetation, creating quite a varied structure, which is really good for and valuable for many species. Got a really brilliant team of volunteer lookers that spend a lot of time out there in all weathers trying to locate these animals, which is quite a challenge at Nor Hill because I mentioned the amount of woodland and scrub. Although they're very big beasts, they're very good at hiding. And this year we've got one which seems to be a bit of a loner and take himself away from the group. But this is all much better now. This week we've managed to have the new GPS collars fitted to the cattle. So that means that the lookers and myself, we can just look it up on our phones, where are they, and go and find them. So that's brilliant. It's going to really reduce the amount of time spent looking for them. Most years we have sheep up on the hill itself, and every winter we have them in Tawny Barn Field. These are our Shetland sheep, which are lovely and very hardy looking, and yeah, they do well in all weathers it seems, but they graze in a very different way, as you probably know, and they're very good for grazing things right back down to the ground, and they can be really good in some of the pits where we've got some of the rarer orchids. So in spring we get a steady stream of interesting species starting to emerge, and our visitor numbers really start to increase as well. You can see hardly anyone there all winter, and then it starts to get busy the second the cowslips come out. And then in mid-April, you tend to have the Duke of Burgundy coming out. So the food plant for dukes is the cowslips. So yeah, that's one of the iconic species associated with Nor Hill. It's a really renowned site for them. And we also get lots of early purple orchids. That's the first orchid to appear, and that's a rare white version that we get of the early purple, which we get on Nor Hill. So it's our start of our survey season. Some things we will survey year round, but really spring is the start of surveying birds. In particular, I'm trying to keep an eye on yellowhammer territories to make sure that with all our scrub management, we're not negatively impacting on the yellowhammers, because it's a really good site for them. We've set up reptile monitoring, so in conjunction with Hampshire and Isle of Wight amphibian and reptile groups. So we've got a series of refugia that are on their database, so any of their volunteers can actually come out and survey Nor Hill as well as our own. And yeah, that's where I'd like to do more surveying. We've got a good slow worm population and grass snakes. Yeah, moth trapping, we do moth trapping when we can. It's very challenging because this this year we haven't had that much good weather for moth trapping, but we are picking up some interesting records. We try and keep a note of the, try and survey our rarer plants. It's not just about orchids. We've got some other key plants there like hoary rock cress and various things that we keep an eye on. And butterflies are monitored through a transect as well. And obviously we record ad hoc records too. But yeah, this is where I need to attract more volunteers is to help with the surveying. I thought I'd show you some of our more popular orchids and rarities that we get at Nor Hill. So we've got a frog orchid there. We had a good year this year. We had 11 of them. So that was up on 3 last year. So I was chuffed with that. We get fly orchid, and we get quite a rare green-flowered version called Ocraluca, so it's always nice to see some of them. And the site is really famed for its musk orchids, and a lot of people come to visit in June to see the musk orchids, even travelling down from Scotland. They get a lot of emails about musk orchids, and they had a good year this year, 800 or so. But previous year, because of the drought, the preceding year, they were well down, probably about 300. And then we've got our lone bee orchid that we had this year, pyramidal orchid and chalk fragrant orchid. But we did an orchid count with our volunteers. It was a different thing for our volunteer group to do this year, so we managed to cover the whole site. I did wonder if I'd slightly lost the plot when I came up with this plan, but I thought we really needed some baseline data so that we could sort of compare every year, or maybe we'll do this every couple of years, just to see how our habitat management is affecting the orchid numbers. So yeah, we had 25,500 orchids. That one on the left is a knapweed broomrape, just chucked in as another interesting plant that we get on site. And then we've got the violet helleborine and autumn ladies tresses, which come up later in the season. So yeah, our butterfly recording, yeah, there's been a transect going for over 30 years now. It's walked by our volunteers and April to October, and that's just a couple of the iconic species. The brown hairstreak sat on its food plant blackthorn, and the Duke of Burgundy sat on its food plant cowslip. And through the summer months with our volunteers, we do lots of fencing and infrastructure works. It's a really good opportunity actually for some of our younger, less experienced volunteers to learn from people that have been doing fencing and technical jobs like that for a while. They're stood in front of the new stock fence we put in at Tawny Barn Field this summer. And I'd just like to point out that Nor is just the best site I know for the small blue butterfly, which is my personal favourite, due to the sheer amount of kidney vetch. The females lay their eggs inside the flower heads of kidney vetch, and yeah, part of the reason that it is such a good site, a big part of the reason is the amount of ground disturbance and bare chalk that has been created over the years. So the area on the right there was a big chalk scrape 15 years ago, and now it's an absolute sea of kidney vetch and other orchids, autumn ladies tresses and so on. And the one on the left there is a scrape that was put in by my predecessor Mike Allen, and we've been weeding that with volunteers to make sure that we get out all the clematis, dogwood, scrub that wants to take over, but we're getting kidney vetch and a lot of other nice species coming up in there. So I'm really hopeful that our scrapes that we put in this year are going to go the same way. There was a big scrape put in 2010 by Plant Life for juniper, and there's lots of young juniper in that scrape, but also it's just a fantastic area for kidney vetch and small blue. And yeah, I just wanted to finish with thanking all of our volunteers and supporters for all their hard work, because we couldn't achieve nearly the amount that we do at Nor without you. So thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Ben, I'm the Reserves Officer for the Lower Tess Valley area, and I'm going to give you a brief whistle-stop tour of everything that happens on our wetland sites across the course of a year. So I joined the Trust 3 years ago on a traineeship, which was initially just a 6-month contract, funded by some major donors, and that really kick-started my career. So I started off in the Portsmouth area, working on Farlington Marshes, which I know has been mentioned quite a lot already. And since January this year, I've moved over to the Lower Tess Valley area, so I now help to manage Testford Lakes and Lower Tess. So yeah, my bread and butter really is all the overwintering waders and wildfowl that come to our shores, and also then the breeding waders in the spring. So I thought I'd sort of break down the year by season. So in the winter, this is when we do a lot of our hardcore practical work, so lots of bonfires with the volunteers. So in the reed beds at Farlington, we'll do a lot of cutting. So this essentially creates a nice variety of age structures across the entire reed bed. So some of the newly cut areas are fantastic for those pioneer species, and then the older stands are fantastic for a different set of species entirely. At the sort of the grazing marsh habitat, we have so much of at Farlington. We do a lot of scrub and tree removal. That's because we want to create like a vast expanse, essentially. So scrub and trees are areas where predators can conceal themselves. And of course, all of the widgeon, teal, brent geese, those sorts of birds that are coming over, they don't want to be grazing near scrub trees. So we take a lot of those out in particular places. So I thought I'd put that into a bit of context with a recently acquired site, Manor House Farm, which is located between Testwood Lakes, which you can see on the right-hand side there, that sort of shimmering blue. And on the left-hand side there, you've got Lower Test by sort of that pylon, so it perfectly nestles in between the two, joining them all up. So yeah, we've done a lot of work there over the last few years. It used to be very compartmentalised with large trees, or willows and alders along all the ditch lines. And of course, as I was saying before, we don't want that. We want a vast expanse area for these birds. They want to be able to be vigilant for predators and, yeah, and look out for any sort of threats to them. So you can see in the before and after photo there, just the sheer difference it's made to the entire feel of the site is far more open, and yeah, it's really getting there now, the habitat. We've also installed lots of sluice gates. So I don't know if you saw in that previous aerial shot, there was lots of old ditches and things. So when we lower these sluice gates in the winter, all of those ditches fill up and we create a really nice wetland habitat. So we get lots of the dabbling duck species, teal and stuff, that will come in, use those water bodies and then graze on the grasslands as well. So in all, it's been a huge success. So some of the results we've had so far, we've had widgeon rock up at 2 o'clock in the morning on a cold February morning. So yeah, those were drawn in by, I don't know if the keen eye amongst you have spotted that those widgeon on the top right corner in the daytime shot, those are plastic widgeon. Amazing what you can find on eBay. We put those out to try and draw them in, because although the habitat was in the right place now, the birds, they want to see other birds using the site to feel safe and be drawn in. So that was a success. Yeah, we also had grey-lag geese grazing there in good numbers, herons returning, little grebe. We've recently had lapwing and curlew starting to use the site on ad hoc basis, so it's really looking good. And we've recently had cattle egrets there feeding in amongst all the cattle. So yes, some really promising signs just in its first year of being flooded. But yes, in the spring, we welcome onto the sites around 200 cattle. And so we do a lot of fencing with our volunteers. The cattle do a fantastic job of keeping the habitat in like pristine condition. So where they graze, they keep the sward very short, which is excellent for the breeding waders, where they can make a scrape, lay their eggs, and yeah, be vigilant for predators again. And also once they then hatch and the chicks are running around, they don't want to be exposed in the long grassy areas where on a cold spring morning, then they can succumb to exposure. So the breeding season, yeah, this is when we really start to panic about all our breeding waders. So we do a lot to protect them. So at Testwood, we put up 10 strands of electric line all the way around the scrape, because we have a really high density of lapwing, redshank, little winged plover breeding there. So if one fox were to get in, for example, they're ruthless predators, let's be honest, and then they can easily take out quite a lot of chicks and eggs and things. So the electric strands do a really good job there. Then at Farlington, we've got this huge bird table, which is where we put out, it's diversionary feeding. So we put out bits of meat and stuff like that. And you'll see the corvid species, ravens, you know, the larger gull species, they'll fly right over the marsh, ignoring all the chicks running around, and take off the meat and stuff we put out. And it's sort of replicating the carrion that would have been there before humans became super tiny, I guess. So yeah, we've had really good successes in recent years, like over 50 lapwing got off at Farlington this year, 12 avocets and 9 redshank as well. At Testwood, we did struggle a little bit with the weather. So yeah, you can see here on the photo on the right-hand side, this is the scrape at Testwood. That's what it usually looks like. So you can see there's these nice islands where we get the majority of our breeding waders going down. But I'm sure as you remember, it was very wet in April, and unfortunately the River Blackwater burst its bank and flooded the scrape. So we already had a lot of lapwings down on nest, and unfortunately lost them. But we did have a few that were hanging on the shingle islands that are just poking out there. You might be able to make out. But it's not a total failure because they do relay. So we still managed to get 10 chicks off this year, along with 3 red shanks and 1 little ring plover. So yeah, climate change is here already, unfortunately. So yeah, moving down towards the coast. This is at Hive Spartina Marsh now. So we had a ring plover nest. So in collaboration with the RSPB, we put out a protective cage over top. So once again, to try and avoid the fox and corvid predation. So that protects those eggs until they hatch, which is a huge success. And then another tool we use is turn rafts. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those. So at Farlington, where we have those shingle islands on the deeps, once all the black-headed gulls and meg gulls have gone down, we then put out these deployable rafts. So the terns, they want to go down a bit afterwards, and there's often not much space left for them. So these rafts do a fantastic job, along with putting out the tern decoys. So these are fake plaster of Paris birds that are made, getting very messy. But yeah, those do an excellent job of drawing them in, because once they see other terns using something like that, they'll be encouraged to go down as well. So in the autumn, we say goodbye to the cattle on our sites before it gets too wet and boggy for them. And we quickly get out in that short window of time with the tractor. We do cut and collects and topping to take off the bulk of the growth over the summer period. And that leaves behind like a bowling green-esque grassland, which is really what we're after. We want that final flourish of grass growth before we get into that cold winter, because that's the super nutritious forage for the birds that are coming from miles and miles around, from Europe, Scandinavia, to feed on our shores over winter. So yeah, a good example of that is what we've lovingly termed marsh cutting down at Lower Test. So in that far photo on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see that the bright green area surrounded by reed beds. The only reason that area isn't reed bed is because we go out there and cut it each year. So that's a long, long time spent with volunteers, with brush cutters. Getting out there is very difficult. It's very boggy. A lot of wellies sometimes come off. But yeah, we brush cut all of the reed regrowth off, and you can see in that sort of this photo on the left-hand side there, where an area we haven't quite got to cutting yet, you can see just the difference it makes. So if you're a tiny little widgeon and you've got your head down grazing in amongst all that reed regrowth, you'd have no chance to spot a predator, a peregrine or something coming in. Whereas if we take all that off with brush cutters, they can be vigilant with predators, see for miles around, and yeah, we get thousands of widgeon coming in there over the winter months to feed. And that's why it's designated as a SSI SPA as it is. So it's really important work that we do, and we couldn't do it without the tireless dedication of all our volunteers. So yeah, lastly, I just want to finish off on giving a big shout out to all of our colleagues and volunteers that work alongside across the counties. It's been a real privilege to work alongside everyone, like the ED team, inspiring the next generation of conservationists. The marine team are out there making amazing improvements to the seagrass meadows, and the ecology team that back all this up with hard evidence, the grazing team that work tirelessly to make sure we have the animals we need on all of our sites to keep them in pristine condition, and the reserves officers up and down the 2 counties that could give far more interesting talks about all of the incredible species they work to protect. And then of course everyone behind the scenes who doesn't often get as much mention as they should, because they make all of this happen. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Fiona and Ben. It's just a really important insight into this amazing work that they do day to day to look after our reserves and make sure they're the very best they can be for nature.
According to the clock on this computer, it's exactly 1 o'clock. But I am going to take just a few seconds, firstly to thank the staff who work in this building for having worked so hard to make it a successful day for us in terms of providing refreshments and dealing with all the setup and the comms and all the rest of it. I'd also like in particular to thank members of the trust staff who've worked towards today. All of you will know just how much work goes into organising something in the background, and if it's looked smooth and effective, it certainly felt that way from my perspective. So a huge thanks to those who've done all the preparation for today. I'd also like to thank my fellow trustees for the work that they have contributed to the success of the Trust in the year in which we've been talking about. A massive thanks to Debbie and her team for making it all happen, because let's face it, without them, none of this would be the success that it is. And finally to you and all those who support and fund and help and champion us, because without you and us, again, none of this would happen. Thank you very much indeed for attending. Meeting is now closed, and I hope you have a safe journey home. Thank you.